The war did not end with an explosion. It ended with a message no one in the coalition had prepared for. Not a plea. Not a threat. Not even a negotiation. An invitation. Admiral Cayley's Vorn read the transmission 3 times before he allowed himself to react, which for him meant nothing at all. His expression remained composed, his posture precise, his mind doing what it had done for nearly 3 centuries, processing extinction as procedure. Humanity's final fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants, their colonies sterilized, their supply lines erased so completely that even their distress signals had grown infrequent, then rare, then silent. By every metric the war was over. And yet, the message did not sound like the voice of something defeated. It was perfectly formatted, flawlessly encoded, structured according to coalition surrender doctrine down to the smallest legal nuance. The kind of precision that suggested careful study, not desperation. It acknowledged loss. It accepted terms. It requested formal conclusion. But then, at the very end, where no clause required anything further, there was a deviation. A set of coordinates. Not to any surviving human stronghold. Not to any hidden fleet. But to a star system the coalition had already declared dead. Vorn did not like deviations. "Confirm origin," he said quietly. Across the bridge, his officers moved with disciplined efficiency, though he could feel the subtle shift in the room. They were victorious. They should have been relieved. Instead, something colder had slipped in, something unspoken. "Confirmed," the signal officer replied. "It's them. Last human flagship. No spoofing. No anomalies in transmission integrity. No anomalies." Vorn stepped closer to the display, eyes narrowing slightly as the star map expanded. The coordinates resolved into a dim system on the outer fringe of previously contested space, a place catalogued decades ago, archived and forgotten. Its classification had been simple. Resource depleted. Population, none. Strategic value, negligible. He remembered the file because he remembered everything. It was one of the traits that had made him valuable to the coalition long before most of his current crew had been born. The system had once supported a massive human energy network, something ambitious, inefficient, and ultimately abandoned when the war escalated beyond their ability to maintain it. They had left it behind. Or so the record said. "Why there?" one of the junior analysts asked before she could stop herself. No one answered her. Because the question had already spread through the bridge like a fracture line. Vorn did not reprimand her. He simply continued staring at the coordinates, as if the answer might reveal itself if he applied enough attention. Humanity was finished. That was not arrogance. It was mathematics. And yet they had chosen that place. He accessed the archived survey data, skimming it at speed. Stellar output within normal range. No active infrastructure detected at the time of scan. No life signatures. No energy anomalies. Nothing that justified its inclusion in a final surrender protocol. Nothing. His gaze paused. Then narrowed. A single line in the deep scan analysis flickered at the edge of relevance, something so minor it should have been meaningless. Background radiation fluctuations, repeating. Not random. Not drifting. Repeating. The survey team had logged it as noise. Vorn read it again. Still noise. Still insignificant. Still wrong. He closed the file. Around him, the bridge had gone very still, the quiet kind that followed a question no one had the authority to ask out loud. Humanity had lost everything. They had 11 ships. No worlds. No reinforcements. No future. And somehow, at the exact moment of their extinction, they had chosen to lead the entire coalition fleet to a place that was supposed to be empty. Vorn finally spoke. "Prepare the fleet for transit." No one questioned the order. They would go. They would witness the end. That was the purpose of victory. But as the stars began to shift and the fleet aligned for the jump, Vorn found himself returning to that single deviation in the message, the unnecessary addition, the one line that served no legal or strategic purpose. 6 words, appended where nothing needed to be said. He had not reacted when he first read them. He did now. Because the longer he thought about them, the less they sounded like the last words of a dying species. and more like the beginning of something else. It's ready for you. The coalition fleet did not rush. Victory had a rhythm, and Admiral Cayley's Vorn had always respected it. You did not sprint toward the end of a war. You approached it with precision, with control, with the quiet certainty that came from knowing there was nothing left that could meaningfully resist you. 47 capital ships moved in formation, their drives bending space with disciplined uniformity, their weapons powered but idle, their crews operating under the assumption that what awaited them was closure, not conflict. And yet the silence inside the command vessel was wrong. Not tense. Not fearful. Wrong. It began with the data. 3 hours into transit, the background telemetry started to shift. Not dramatically. Not enough to trigger alerts. But enough for the systems to log subtle deviations, microscopic irregularities in radiation density, gravitational noise that repeated in patterns just barely outside expected models. The kind of thing most crews would ignore, because space was never perfectly still. But Vorn did not believe in coincidence. Run a comparative sweep, he ordered. His science officer hesitated, not out of doubt, but because there was no official reason to do so. Still, she complied. Layers of archived data unfolded across the display, cross-referenced with live readings, projections overlaying reality in a cascade of shifting variables. Minutes passed. Then her posture changed. These fluctuations. She did not finish. She didn't need to. Vorn was already looking. The patterns were repeating. Not approximately. Not statistically. Exactly. The same intervals. The same intensity. The same spacing between peaks and troughs, cycling with mechanical precision. It wasn't drift. It wasn't interference. It was structure. Could it be residual infrastructure? Another officer suggested, too quickly. No, the science officer replied before Vorn could speak. If it were infrastructure, we would see localized sources. This is system-wide. It's distributed. Distributed. The words settled into the room like a weight. Vorn did not react outwardly, but he adjusted the display, isolating the signal and expanding its timeline. The pattern stretched back further than expected, threading through older data, faint but consistent. It had been there before. Decades before. But ignored. He accessed the original survey file again, this time not skimming, not dismissing. The coalition had cataloged thousands of systems during the war, many of them reduced to nothing but data points in an expanding archive of conquest. Efficiency demanded that you trust prior classifications. But efficiency was not the same as certainty. The survey team had spent 6 days in that system. 6 days to decide it was empty. 6 days to declare it irrelevant. 6 days to overlook something that was still there now, repeating itself with patient, unbroken consistency. Why wasn't this flagged? The junior analyst asked again, quieter this time. Because it didn't matter, someone answered. Vorn disagreed. Everything mattered. Especially the things that didn't. Overlay human activity logs, he said. The bridge complied. A second layer of data appeared, records of human presence before the system was abandoned. Energy outputs, construction signatures, resource extraction patterns. The system had once been active, not heavily populated but significant enough to warrant attention. Then, gradually, it had gone dark. Not destroyed. Not attacked. Simply abandoned. The timelines did not align cleanly. The radiation pattern had continued. Unchanged. Uninterrupted. Unaffected by the absence of human activity. That was not how abandoned systems behaved. Admiral, the communications officer said carefully, we are receiving intermittent low-frequency echoes. Not a signal. Not exactly. More like reflections. Reflections of what? She hesitated. We don't know. That answer lingered longer than it should have. Vorn turned his attention back to the stars ahead, the target system still several jumps away. From this distance, it was nothing more than a faint coordinate in a sea of coordinates, indistinguishable from the thousands of other dead systems the coalition had passed through during the war. And yet this one had been chosen. Not randomly. Not symbolically. Specifically. He replayed the transmission again, isolating the final line. It's ready for you. Not we are ready. Not we surrender. Something else. Something that implied separation. Humanity had not said they were waiting. They had said something was. Admiral, the science officer said, voice tighter now, the pattern, it's accelerating. Vorn looked back to the display. She was right. The intervals were shortening. Not chaotically. Not erratically. Deliberately. As if whatever system was producing the pattern had become aware of their approach. That was not possible. Nothing in that system should have been active. Nothing should have been there at all. And yet the closer they moved, the more precise the pattern became, refining itself, tightening its rhythm, aligning with something that felt less like physics and more like anticipation. No one spoke. Because no one wanted to say the obvious thing. That they were not just traveling toward a dead system. They were approaching something that had been there long before they arrived. Something that had never stopped. And was now, for the first time in decades, beginning to change. The system appeared exactly as it should have. That was the first problem. When the coalition fleet emerged from transit, the star burned with the steady, indifferent light of a perfectly ordinary sun. Its spectrum matched archived data within acceptable margins. Its gravitational field was stable. The surrounding debris field, remnants of whatever humanity had once built here, floated in silent orbit, cold and lifeless. No defenses. No ships. No energy signatures. Nothing. For several long seconds, the bridge of Vorn's flagship remained silent, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything visible confirmed the official record too perfectly. Dead systems were never this clean. Even destruction left scars, radiation spikes, gravitational distortions, remnants of collapse. This place looked curated. Full spectrum scan, Vorn ordered. The fleet complied instantly, waves of sensor arrays sweeping across the system in overlapping layers. Data flooded in, thermal readings, electromagnetic analysis, particle density mapping, each confirming the same conclusion. Empty. And yet, Admiral, the science officer's voice was tight again. The pattern is still present. Vorn didn't look at her. Show me. The display shifted. At first, it looked like noise, a faint background fluctuation barely distinguishable from cosmic radiation. But as the system filtered and enhanced the signal, it resolved into something unmistakable. The same pattern. Stronger now. Clear. And anchored to the entire system. Not the star. Not the debris. Everything. It wasn't emanating from a source. It was the source. That's not possible, someone whispered. Vorn didn't correct them. Because it wasn't. Physics did not allow for system-wide synchronization without a central mechanism. There had to be a core, a structure, something generating the signal. But every scan said there was nothing there. Focus on the debris field, Vorn said. Fragments of ancient human construction drifted in orbit. Shattered rings, broken conduits, the skeletal remains of something vast that had once encircled the star. Whatever humanity had built here had not been small. It had been ambitious on a scale bordering on reckless. And now it was gone. Or so it seemed. Zoom, Vorn said. The magnification tightened. The debris resolved into finer detail, jagged edges, fractured surfaces, long-abandoned materials slowly degrading under stellar radiation. Nothing moved. Nothing functioned. Until something did. Hold, the science officer said sharply. A segment of debris, a fractured arc of metallic structure, shifted. Not drifting. Not tumbling. Shifting. By less than a fraction of a degree. So small that if they hadn't been magnifying it, they would have missed it entirely. Gravitational interference? Another officer suggested quickly. No, the science officer replied, already running calculations. There's no force acting on it. No external vector. It just corrected. Corrected. The word lingered. Run it back, Vorn said. They replayed the last 10 seconds. The fragment drifted. Then adjusted. Not randomly. Precisely. Aligned with something unseen. Tracks surrounding debris, Vorn ordered. More data flooded in. Other fragments. Other shifts. Subtle. Almost imperceptible. But synchronized. The entire debris field was moving, not chaotically, not under natural forces, but in coordinated micro-adjustments, each piece aligning itself within a larger, invisible structure. The system wasn't dead. It was holding position. "Admiral," the communications officer said, voice lower now, "we're detecting resonance." "From where?" "Everywhere." That answer again. Everywhere. The pattern wasn't just repeating anymore. It was interacting. Signals bounced between fragments, reflecting, amplifying, creating interference patterns that resolved into something disturbingly familiar. Like a system testing itself. Vorn felt it then. Not fear, not yet, but the unmistakable awareness that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer observing a phenomenon. They were inside it. "Deploy a probe," he said. There was no hesitation this time. A reconnaissance vessel detached from the flagship, its engines firing in controlled bursts as it moved toward the inner debris field. Its mission was simple: close-range analysis, atmospheric sampling near the star, verification of structure. Routine. Predictable. The probe crossed the outer threshold. Nothing happened. It moved deeper. Still nothing. The data it transmitted remained clean, stable, consistent with prior scans. Then the pattern changed. On every display, across every ship in the fleet, the background signal shifted frequency. Not randomly. In response. "Admiral," the science officer whispered, "it's reacting to the probe." "How?" "I don't know." The probe continued its approach. Closer to the star. Closer to the densest region of debris. And then, the feed cut. No explosion. No warning. No signal degradation. One moment it was there. The next, it wasn't. Gone. Silence filled the bridge. Not confusion. Not panic. Something heavier. Because destruction made sense. This did not. "Status," Vorn said. "No debris," the tactical officer replied immediately. "No energy spike. No impact signature. It's just gone. Gone." The system hadn't destroyed it. It had removed it. And as if that realization alone wasn't enough, the pattern changed again. Stronger now. Faster. No longer passive. No longer repeating. Evolving. As though the moment the probe crossed a threshold, something had acknowledged it. And begun to learn. Vorn stared at the display, at the empty space where the probe had been, at the shifting pattern that now pulsed through the system with undeniable intent. Humanity had sent them here. Not to witness surrender, but to see this. And for the first time since the war had begun, Admiral Cayley's Vorn found himself asking a question he had never needed to ask before. Not what are we looking at, but what had humanity been building that didn't need them anymore? The silence did not last. It fractured. "Signal, returning signal," the communications officer snapped, her voice cutting through the stillness with something dangerously close to alarm. Every display on the bridge shifted at once. The lost probe was transmitting again. Not weakly. Not damaged. Not distorted. Perfectly. Vorn did not move, but his attention sharpened with surgical precision as the data streamed in. Telemetry first, clean, structured, intact. Power levels nominal. Systems reporting stability. No sign of failure, no indication of trauma. It was as if the probe had never disappeared at all. "Replay last transmission," Vorn said. The system complied. One frame, stable approach. Next frame, nothing. Now, complete data continuity. There was no transition. No bridge between absence and return. "Run internal diagnostics on the feed," the science officer said quickly, already anticipating the need. "They're clean," the systems analyst responded. "No corruption. No gaps in the data structure. It's consistent." Consistent. That word again. Vorn stepped closer to the main display. Expand telemetry parameters. The raw data unfolded into deeper layers: material composition, energy flow, system architecture. The probe wasn't sending back environmental scans. It was sending back itself. "Why is it transmitting internal mapping?" someone asked. No one answered. Because the question had already evolved into something worse. The data wasn't just reporting. It was being organized, refined, structured in a way that suggested intent. Cross-reference with original probe schematics, Vorn ordered. The comparisons snapped into place. Every component, hull integrity, circuitry, fuel systems, was being broken down into precise, hierarchical layers. Not just described but understood. Patterns of redundancy, weaknesses, optimization pathways, all of it laid out with a clarity that exceeded the Coalition's own engineering models. "This isn't a scan," the science officer said slowly. Vorn didn't look away from the display. "No," he said. "It's an analysis." The word settled heavily, because analysis implied purpose. And purpose implied direction. "Is there any indication of external interference?" Vorn asked. "No physical intrusion," the science officer replied. "No contact points. No energy signatures consistent with disassembly or probing. Whatever is happening, it's not interacting with the probe in any way we understand." Not interacting. And yet it knew everything. The data stream shifted. A new layer appeared. Weapon systems. The probe didn't have any. But the system was projecting them. Simulating. Running models based on Coalition design architecture, predicting potential configurations, extrapolating capabilities from fragments of known data. It was building possibilities faster than the bridge crew could process them. "Where is it getting that information?" the junior analyst asked, her voice barely controlled. Vorn already knew the answer. From them. Every scan the fleet had run since entering the system. Every signal they had emitted. Every piece of themselves they had exposed. "You're being studied," he said quietly. No one responded. Because they all felt it now. The shift. They were no longer the dominant presence. They were data. "Terminate the probe connection," the tactical officer suggested. "Do it." The signal cut instantly. The feed vanished. The bridge exhaled, just slightly, then froze. Because the pattern didn't stop. It continued. Uninterrupted. As if the connection had never mattered. As if the probe had never been the point. "Admiral," the communications officer said slowly, "the signal, it's still updating." Vorn turned his head. "What?" "We severed the feed, but the data structure is still evolving. It's continuing the analysis. Without input. Without connection. That wasn't possible." "It already has everything it needs," the science officer finished, her voice hollow. The realization spread across the bridge in a wave. The probe hadn't been a target. It had been a sample. And now the system didn't need it anymore. The pattern intensified. Faster. Sharper. The subtle background fluctuations that had once been easy to dismiss now pulsed with unmistakable rhythm, threading through the entire system like a heartbeat growing stronger with each cycle. "Magnitude increase?" Vorn asked. "Yes," the science officer replied. "Across all frequencies. It's scaling." Scaling. Toward what? No answer came. Because no one could define the endpoint. The system wasn't attacking. It wasn't defending. It was building something. "Admiral," the tactical officer said, tension breaking through his discipline, "recommend repositioning the fleet to outer orbit. Maintain distance until we understand." "No." The word landed flat and absolute. Vorn's gaze remained fixed on the display. "If it wanted to destroy us, it would have," he said. "That's an assumption," the tactical officer replied carefully. "No," Vorn said. "It's a calculation." The probe had vanished without resistance. Returned without damage. Analyzed beyond comprehension. If the system had intended harm, it would have acted already. Instead, it was preparing. For what, he did not know. But the absence of aggression was not comfort. It was something far more dangerous. Because aggression could be answered. This could not. "Continue observation," Vorn ordered. The officers obeyed, though unease now moved openly through the bridge. Data streams multiplied, projections overlapping in attempts to predict behavior that did not follow any known model. Hours passed. Another shift. The pattern changed again. Not just faster. Directed. The pulses began to focus, narrowing into vectors that extended outward from the system, stretching into deep space with impossible precision. "Admiral," the communications officer whispered, "it's projecting." "Projecting what?" She swallowed. Coordinates. Vorn's eyes flicked to the display as the system resolved the data. Points appeared across the map. Not random. Not scattered. Aligned. Targeted. Each one marked with exacting accuracy. The Coalition registry recognized them instantly. Homeworlds. Member civilizations. Every species that had participated in the war. Silence consumed the bridge. Because in that moment, the nature of what they were facing became something else entirely. Not a weapon. Not a defense system. Something older. Something patient. Something that had just finished learning who they were. And was now deciding what to do with that knowledge. The transmission did not come from the system. It came from the human. No one saw him arrive. There was no alert, no docking request, no approach vector logged by any of the fleet sensors. One moment the Coalition command deck was sealed, secure, operating under absolute military control. The next he was standing there. Not armed. Not escorted. Not even acknowledged at first. Just present. It took 3 full seconds for anyone to react, and in those 3 seconds something subtle but profound shifted across the bridge. Not panic. Not alarm. Recognition. Not of him, but of what his presence meant. Identify yourself, the tactical officer snapped, recovering first. The man didn't move. He looked older than expected, not fragile, not weak, but worn in a way that suggested time had not passed gently over him. His posture was relaxed, almost casual, as if he had stepped into a place that no longer intimidated him. "You already know who I am," he said. His voice was calm. Not defiant. Not pleading. Certain. Vorn studied him in silence, measuring every detail. There were no visible implants, no shielding signatures, no distortion fields. No explanation for how he had crossed the distance between ships without being detected. "Explain your presence," Vorn said. The man tilted his head slightly, considering. "I thought it would be easier this way," he replied. "Easier for what?" The man's gaze shifted briefly toward the main display. The coordinates, the expanding pattern, the system still pulsing with that precise, growing rhythm. "For you to understand." The bridge tightened. Vorn stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to assert control without acknowledging uncertainty. "You initiated surrender protocols," he said. "You brought us here. If this is a deception..." "It's not," the man interrupted gently. That, more than anything, made several officers stiffen. Because there was no tension in his voice. No edge. Just clarity. "Then explain," Vorn said. The man exhaled slowly, as if he had expected this moment to arrive exactly as it had. "You think we built a weapon," he said. No one responded. Because that was the only logical conclusion. The system was analyzing them. Mapping them. Broadcasting their locations across space with impossible precision. Weapons did that. Before they acted. Before they struck. "You're wrong," the man continued. A flicker of irritation crossed the tactical officer's expression. "We watched it consume a probe. We are watching it catalog our fleet. It is targeting." "No," the man said softly. "It's remembering." The word landed with a strange weight. Not threatening. Not aggressive. But final. Vorn's eyes narrowed. "Clarify." The man's gaze returned to him, steady and unflinching. "For thousands of years," he said, "we lived on one world. One system. No escape. No second chances. Every mistake we made, we had to survive it. Every war. Every plague. Every collapse." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Everything that could go wrong, did. And every time it did, we adapted. We changed. The science officer shifted slightly, drawn in despite herself. "We thought we were just trying to stay alive," the man continued. "But we weren't. Not really." He glanced again at the system beyond the viewport, at the silent star and the drifting fragments that no longer seemed random. "We were feeding it." The pause. No one interrupted. Because something in the way he said it made interruption feel inadequate. "The atmosphere carried our mistakes," he said. "The ground absorbed them. The oceans spread them. Every chemical, every pathogen, every weapon, we left all of it behind. And the system recorded everything. That's not possible, someone said, almost reflexively. The man nodded slightly. We said the same thing. Silence stretched. Vorn felt it then, the shift in the framework he had been using to understand the situation. The assumptions that had held steady for centuries beginning to fracture under the weight of something larger. You're describing passive accumulation, Vorn said carefully. That does not explain active analysis. The man's expression didn't change. No, he said. It doesn't. He took a single step forward. Not aggressive. Not defensive. Just enough to draw every eye in the room. It didn't stay passive. The pattern on the display pulsed again. Stronger. Sharper. As if responding to his words. We left, the man continued. 300 years ago. We thought we were abandoning it. Thought we had taken everything that mattered with us. His voice softened, just slightly. We were wrong. The science officer swallowed. What happened after you left? The man looked at her, and for the first time there was something like emotion in his expression. Not fear, not anger. Something deeper. It had everything it needed, he said. Time, data, and no interruptions. The implications landed slowly. Then all at once. Processing, Vorn said quietly. Yes. Refining. Yes. Evolving. The man didn't answer immediately. Because he didn't need to. The system answered for him. The pattern surged, frequencies aligning into tighter sequences, the broadcast vectors stabilizing with terrifying precision. The map expanded, more coordinates, more systems, more targets. Not targets. Records. Every civilization involved in the war. Every action taken. Every engagement logged. The system wasn't preparing to strike. It was finalizing something. Why bring us here? Vorn asked. The man met his gaze. Because you were about to finish it, he said. Finish what? Us. The word hung in the air. Heavy. Absolute. And if we had? The tactical officer pressed. The man's eyes didn't leave Vorn's. Then you wouldn't be standing here right now. No one moved. No one spoke. Because for the first time, the question wasn't what the system could do. It was what it had been waiting for. And whether the coalition had just come close enough to find out. The realization did not arrive as panic. It arrived as calculation. Across 47 coalition warships, hundreds of command officers, analysts, and strategists processed the same conclusion at nearly the same time, and none of them liked where it led. If it activates, the tactical officer said slowly, forcing the words into structure, we have no model for containment. No, the science officer replied. We don't even have a model for interaction. That was worse. Weapons could be countered. Systems could be disrupted. Even unknown technologies followed patterns eventually. But this had been learning for centuries. Quietly. Completely. Without opposition. Admiral, the communications officer said, voice tight with urgency, the broadcast is expanding. Vorn didn't turn. Define expanding. Range is increasing. Signal strength is compounding beyond expected limits. It's not just reaching the listed coordinates anymore. It's reinforcing them. Locking onto them. The display shifted again. The map that had once shown a handful of marked systems now bloomed outward, each point connected by faint, pulsing threads of data. Not lines of attack. Lines of awareness. Each one precise. Each one permanent. It's not a transmission, the science officer whispered. It's a network. The word settled heavily. Because networks did not forget. Vorn watched the data flow, his mind moving faster now, assembling fragments into something that resembled understanding. The system wasn't escalating toward destruction. It was escalating toward completion. Time frame, he asked. The science officer hesitated. We don't know, she admitted. But the rate of increase is accelerating. Whatever it's doing, it's nearing a threshold. A threshold of what? No one could answer. But everyone felt it. The tightening. The narrowing of possibilities. Recommend immediate withdrawal, the tactical officer said. We break orbit, disengage, and reassess from a safe distance. And what changes? Honest. The officer faltered. Distance. Distance is irrelevant, Vorn cut in. It already knows where we are. Where we come from. Where we go. He gestured to the expanding network. We are already inside it. Silence followed. Because that was the truth none of them wanted to say out loud. Retreat wouldn't remove them. It would only prove something. Admiral, the junior analyst said carefully, if the system is cataloging us, what happens when it finishes? No one answered. Because the answer wasn't data. It was speculation. And speculation had just become dangerous. The human spoke again. You're thinking of it like a weapon, he said, almost gently. Something that acts when it's ready. Vorn didn't look at him. Isn't it? No. That single word landed harder than any alarm. It doesn't act because it's ready, the man continued. It acts because something changes. What changes? Vorn asked. The man was quiet for a moment. Context. The pattern pulsed again. Sharper. Faster. The display updated in real time, each coordinate now layered with additional data, timestamps, classifications, unknown variables stacking faster than the systems could categorize them. Admiral, the science officer said, her voice no longer steady, it's not just mapping locations. It's mapping events. What kind of events? She swallowed. Conflict markers. Historical engagements. Resource extractions. Biological impacts. The implications hit all at once. It's building a record, the tactical officer said. No, the human corrected softly. It's building memory. That word again. Memory. Permanent. Unchangeable. Unforgiving. Admiral, the communications officer said suddenly, sharper now, we're receiving incoming queries. From where? She looked at him. From the network. The bridge froze. Define query. They're not signals in any format we recognize, she said quickly. But they're structured, directed at us. At the fleet. At our systems. What are they asking? She hesitated. I don't think they're asking anything. Then what are they doing? The answer came from the science officer. They're comparing. The room went still. Comparing what? Against what? No one needed to say it. The system was aligning what it knew about them with what it had learned before. Admiral, the tactical officer said, tension breaking through now, we need to decide. If there is even a chance this thing can be disrupted, we should act before it. Before it what? Von asked. Before it completes whatever this is. And what does that accomplish? The officer didn't answer, because there was no clear outcome. Only risk. Vorn finally turned to the human. You said it acts when context changes, he said. What context are we approaching? The man held his gaze. The end. The end of what? The answer came without hesitation. Of us. Silence collapsed over the bridge. Because suddenly, everything aligned. The war. The near extinction. The final transmission. The invitation. If humanity was erased, if the last of them were gone, then the system would have no reason to remain passive. No reason to wait. No reason to hold. Admiral, the junior analyst whispered, the realization breaking through her composure, we're not just inside its network. Vorn didn't move. We're inside its decision. The pattern surged again. Brighter. Faster. The network stabilized. And for the first time, it stopped expanding. Not because it was finished, but because it had reached exactly as far as it needed to. No further. No less. Every relevant system marked. Every participant recorded. Every action remembered. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Because the question had changed. It was no longer what the system was doing, or how it worked, or what it could become. It was something far simpler, far more immediate. Had they already gone too far? Or was there still time to stop what came next? No alarm sounded. No weapons fired. No catastrophic event unfolded to validate the fear rising across the fleet. And that was precisely what made it unbearable. Because everything that mattered had already happened. The network was complete. Every marked system remained fixed on the display, each coordinate pulsing with quiet, undeniable presence. Not growing. Not fading. Just like a map that no longer needed to update because it had nothing left to learn. Status unchanged, the science officer reported, though her voice suggested she no longer believed that meant anything. Unchanged didn't mean safe. It meant waiting. Admiral Cayley's Vorn stood motionless, eyes locked on the system beyond the viewport. The star still burned as it always had. The debris field still drifted in its precise, almost unnatural alignment. Nothing outwardly aggressive. Nothing outwardly threatening. But the entire fleet could feel it now. They were being held in a moment. A decision point that had not yet resolved. How long? The tactical officer asked, not to anyone in particular. No one answered. Because time no longer had a clear meaning here. The human broke the silence. It won't be long. Vorn turned to him slowly. You speak as if you understand its timeline. I understand its priority, the man replied. And what is that? The man glanced once at the display, the network, the coordinates, the quiet completeness of it all. Us. That word again. Not said with pride. Not said with fear. Just fact. Vorn studied him, searching for any trace of deception, any indication that this was still a strategy, a maneuver, a last desperate attempt to regain leverage. He found none. Only certainty. If your species is its priority, Vorn said, then why hasn't it acted? The man met his gaze. Because you haven't finished. The implication landed like a physical weight. The tactical officer stepped forward, unable to contain it any longer. We can finish it now, he said. One coordinated strike. 11 ships. It ends here. The human didn't even look at him. That's exactly what it's waiting for. Silence followed. Because for the first time, the logic was undeniable. This system, this intelligence, had not intervened during the war. It had not protected humanity's colonies. It had not stopped their fleets from being destroyed. It had waited. And now, it was waiting again. For a final input. Admiral, the communications officer said, her voice tightening, we're receiving a direct channel request. From the system? She shook her head slowly. No. The pause. From Coalition Central Command. Of course. The network had reached them. Vorn didn't need to see the message to know what it would contain. Confirmation. Orders. Put it through. The transmission filled the central display. The faces of the High Council appeared, leaders of the Coalition's core species, beings who had authorized the war, sustained it, and now stood at the edge of its conclusion. They did not look victorious. They looked measured. Admiral Vorn, the lead counselor said, voice controlled but carrying something deeper beneath it. We are receiving the same data you are. Vorn inclined his head slightly. Then you understand the situation. We understand enough. That was not reassurance. What are your orders? Vorn asked. The counselor hesitated. For rare thing, we are reviewing all options. The tactical officer's restraint finally broke. With respect, there are no options. We either neutralize the remaining human fleet or we trigger something we do not understand, the counselor interrupted sharply. Silence followed. Because that was the truth none of them could avoid anymore. The war had been fought under clear assumptions. Humanity could be defeated. Their infrastructure could be dismantled. Their species could be erased. Those assumptions were no longer valid. What is the system doing now? The counselor asked. Vorn answered without looking away from the display. It has completed its network. And then, it is waiting. The council chamber went still. Because waiting implied choice. And choice implied consequence. For whom? The counselor asked quietly. Vorn did not answer immediately. He didn't need to. The answer was obvious. For us. The human shifted slightly, just enough to draw attention back to him. You wanted to know what we built, he said. The counselor's gaze snapped to him. You brought this into existence? The man shook his head. No. Then what are we looking at? He held the counselor's stare without hesitation. What we became. That landed harder than any threat. Because it reframed everything. This wasn't a weapon humanity had created. It was something humanity had shaped. Something that had grown from everything they had endured. Everything they had survived. Everything the coalition had tried to destroy. The tactical officer took a step forward again, voice lower now, more controlled but no less urgent. Admiral, we cannot allow an unknown system with this level of capability to exist unchecked. If it has chosen not to act yet, that does not mean it won't. And if we act? Vorn asked. The officer hesitated. That's the risk. Yes, Vorn said quietly. It is. He turned back to the human. You said it acts when context changes, he said. Define the threshold. The man didn't hesitate. The last human. The words echoed through the bridge. Final. Absolute. If the last human died, if the species was erased, the system would no longer have a reason to remain passive. No reason to observe. No reason to wait. It would have only one remaining function. And no restraint. The counselor's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of its earlier authority. How many of you are left? The man didn't look at him. Enough. That wasn't an answer. But it was enough. Because the implication was clear. Humanity still existed. And as long as it did, the system held. Barely. Vorn felt it then. Not fear. Not uncertainty. Something far rare. The exact moment where power shifted. Not through force. Not through destruction. But through the realization that continuing forward would lead somewhere irreversible. Admiral, the counselor said, voice steady again but carrying a weight it hadn't before, you are in command on site. Your assessment. Vorn looked at the network. At the system. At the human standing calmly in the center of a fleet that had spent decades trying to erase him. And for the first time in 300 years of command, he understood what it meant to stand on the wrong side of a decision. If we finish the war, he said slowly, we lose more than we gain. The counselor held his gaze. Define more. Vorn didn't look away. Everything we cannot survive. Silence followed. Heavy. Measured. Final. And then, the counselor nodded. Not quickly. Not easily. But decisively. Because the conclusion had already been reached. They had just needed someone to say it out loud. The network pulsed once more. Not stronger. Not weaker. But attentive. As if something, somewhere within it, was listening. Waiting. For what they would choose next. The decision did not arrive as a command. It arrived as silence. Across the coalition network, from the High Council to the lowest tactical stations, no one spoke for several long seconds after Admiral Vorn finished. There were no arguments, no last-minute strategies, no desperate attempts to reclaim control. Because for the first time since the war began, control was no longer something they possessed. It was something they could lose. The counselor exhaled slowly, a gesture that carried more weight than any formal declaration. Prepare the documentation, he said at last. Not attack. Not retreat. Documentation. Even now, the coalition responded the only way it knew how, through structure, through process, through the quiet ritual of acknowledging reality in terms it could understand. But beneath that formality, something far more profound had already shifted. We are authorizing full cessation of hostilities, the counselor continued, his voice steady but no longer distant. All coalition forces will stand down. Effective immediately. The words spread through the fleet like a ripple. Weapons powered down. Targeting systems disengaged. 47 warships, designed, built, and refined over centuries for the singular purpose of overwhelming force, fell still. Not because they had been defeated, but because they had understood. The network pulsed. Subtle. Measured. As if acknowledging the change. Admiral Vorn watched it happen without moving, his attention fixed on the system beyond the viewport. The star burned as it always had. The debris field maintained its precise, silent alignment. Nothing outwardly changed. And yet everything had. Transmission incoming, the communications officer said quietly. From Central Command? She shook her head. No. The pause. From the system. The bridge froze. Put it through, Vorn said. There was no hesitation this time. The display shifted, Not to data, not to coordinates, not to patterns, but to something simpler. A single sequence. Repeated. Structured. The science officer stared at it, her breath catching as understanding began to form. It's not a language, she whispered. No, Vorn said softly. It doesn't need to be. Because meaning didn't require words. Not here. Not now. The sequence resolved into something unmistakable, not in syntax, not in translation, but in intent. Recognition. Not of individuals. Not of ships. Of the decision. The network did not expand. It did not intensify. It did not escalate. It held. Steady. Watching. Remembering. And for the first time since they had entered the system, the sense of pressure, the invisible weight pressing against every mind on the bridge, eased. Not gone. Never gone. But reduced. Conditional. Admiral, the tactical officer said quietly, it's not advancing. No, Vorn replied. It isn't. The human stood where he had always been, unmoving, observing the shift with an expression that was neither relief nor triumph. Only acceptance. You were right, Vorn said, turning slightly toward him. The man shook his head. No, he said. We were just the last variable. That lingered, because it reframed everything one final time. This had never been about victory, or defeat, or even survival. It had been about a threshold, and they had chosen not to cross it. Signal the fleet, Vorn said. The communications officer nodded. Standing orders confirmed. Full withdrawal procedures initiated. One by one, the coalition ships began to move, not in panic, not in disorder, but with the same controlled precision they had arrived with. Formation adjusted. Engines engaged. Distance increased. But this time, they were not advancing. They were leaving. Not because they had been driven out, but because they understood what it meant to stay. The network remained. Unchanged. Watching them go. Hours later, as the fleet prepared for final transit out of the system, the last of the documentation was completed. Formal records. Official statements. Historical entries that would define this moment for generations. But none of them captured the truth. Not completely. Because there were no words in any coalition language for what they had witnessed. Only approximations. Warnings. Final system scan complete, the science officer reported. Vorn nodded once. Anything. She hesitated. One thing. He glanced at her. The pattern, she said. It hasn't stopped. Of course it hadn't. Vorn looked back at the star. At the silent, patient system that had waited through centuries of absence, through decades of war, through the near extinction of the species that had shaped it. It was still learning. Still watching. Still remembering. What is it doing? The junior analyst asked softly. The science officer didn't answer immediately. Because this time, she understood. It's continuing, she said. Continuing what? No one asked. Because they already knew. The war had ended. But the system had not. It would remain. It would observe. It would remember every decision, every action, every species that had come close enough to matter. And somewhere within that vast, silent network, humanity still existed. Which meant the threshold still held. Barely. As the coalition fleet vanished into transit, leaving the system behind, Admiral Vorn allowed himself one final look. Not at a weapon. Not at an enemy. But at something far more dangerous. Something that did not need to act to be feared. Because it already knew. And it would never forget. Far beyond the system, in the quiet expanse of space the coalition no longer claimed, signals continued to move, precise, structured, deliberate, threading through the network that now spans civilizations. Not a threat. Not a warning. A record. A memory. And a promise that if the balance ever broke, if humanity ever reached its end, the universe would not meet them in war again. It would meet them in something that had learned, patiently and completely, exactly how to respond. And this time, it would not wait.